In today's video, we are back looking at some of the top players who likely could be traded when the NHL resumes play between then and the trade deadline. Plus, it looks like the Bruins are very close to bringing back goaltender Tuukka Rask, and the NHL has announced some changes. We have taxi squads making a return. We'll discuss how this all works, and it's only temporary. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some more news from the NHL and some trade rumors to talk about here today as well. The news on taxi squads is pretty new here. This was just announced earlier this afternoon. The NHL is allowing the return on a temporary basis of the taxi squads, given the fact that NHL teams are having such a difficult time putting together full lineups and obviously recalling players from the AHL and kind of getting together everything with all the positive COVID tests that we've seen so far here. Now, of course, NHL players were reporting back today on Boxing Day, December the 26th, and we're all being tested. We saw a whole bunch more announcements of players entering NHL COVID protocol. Like one example, it's pretty extreme. In the case of the Maple Leafs, they have several key players out in protocol, and their American Hockey League team is also hit super hard as well with the Marlies. They cannot even finish recalling enough players to actually have a full lineup. Looks like they're going to have to play short-handed, but we know like Nylander, Riley, Muzzin, I believe Campbell, there's a whole bunch of other ones recently added to the COVID protocols here since Christmas Eve, I believe it was. So it's certainly not a good scene, but like I said, several more players today on a variety of teams. We could go through all of them, but there's no point in doing that. All teams, mostly, except for one or two, are impacted here with at least some players on COVID protocols, some coaches, other staff members. Like it's pretty difficult right now. So the NHL is allowing taxi squads again. So here are the rules around the taxi squads. I'll show you the information here, courtesy of our friends at capfriendly.com. I'll put together this graphic that's easy to understand for everybody. Essentially, the taxi squads start now, and they end after each team's final game heading into the NHL All-Star break. Now, I won't be completely shocked unless the NHL decides to change its testing protocols, that might even be extended. Would not be surprising at all. They have a maximum of 6 players on the taxi squad. There are no minimums. Of course, there's no obligation to use this at all. And no NHL players shall be on the taxi squad more than 20 consecutive days. So the whole point here is there's no point in having players on your taxi squad if you don't really need them and they're just going to be sitting around not playing. So there's also some eligibility requirements that have to be met in order to be on the taxi squad. So if you meet all 3 of these following criteria, you are ineligible to be on the taxi squad. This probably won't eliminate a whole lot of players, but this is designed with a couple things in mind, in my opinion. One, they don't want players sitting around when they can be playing in another league like the minors. They don't want teams trying to utilize this as a cap loophole and putting certain players there that are going to not count against the cap and things like that. And of course, like they don't want it used as much as it needs to be. It's a minimum amount, if at all possible, but a lot of it's going to depend on a team-by-team basis. So if you meet the 3 following criteria, you are not eligible. So if you were on an NHL active roster, injured reserve, or designated as an NHL roster but a non-roster selection as of the last day of NHL games, which was December the 22nd, not including any players that were considered emergency recalls. That's the first criteria. So if you meet that, and you're also exempt from NHL waivers. So of course, the only players that are exempt from that are players early in their NHL careers on entry-level contracts. And number 3, they've been on an NHL roster for 54 days from the time the season started, October 12th, up until the final day of game action, December the 22nd, or if they've played or competed in 16 of the final 20 games leading up to the holiday break for their current NHL franchise. So obviously, that would mean in that case that they've really been an NHL player for the bulk of the time this year, so they're not really going to be considered the kind of player that's mostly been in the minors that's looking for that opportunity and that they can bring up here. That's kind of what they're looking for here. Now, the other rule that they adjusted here is the emergency recall rule. Normally, the player that's called up on an emergency basis can be making no more than $850,000 at the NHL level. That has been increased to be $1 million. So obviously there are some players that are making a little bit more money that get buried in the minors, they can now be considered for that emergency recall selection when the situation justifies it. So clearly the NHL has an issue here. Many other professional leagues here, like football and basketball, have been making adjustments to their testing for COVID protocols here. And the NHL, if they don't as well, they are going to continue running into chaos here all season, and they're going to have a lot of issues. Now, I'm not going to say what's right and what's wrong, because I know there's a lot of different opinions out there, but ultimately those other leagues, they're only testing when players are symptomatic as long as they're fully vaccinated. The NHL has all but one player fully vaccinated, many of which have also gotten their booster shots. So the way that the players, many players, I shouldn't say all players because that's not the case, but a lot of NHL players have spoken out against it, that they would like to see things adjusted so that they are only tested if they are symptomatic, or at the very least they're not tested as frequently, because a lot of these players are getting positive tests but not getting any symptoms. But at the same time, it's the way this whole pandemic has carried on here for the last couple of years. A big part of the issue with this virus is that you can be asymptomatic and still possibly, not a guarantee, but possibly pass it on to somebody else. And if it gets to the wrong person who's a higher risk, well, that's an issue, right? You don't want to cause other people to be sick and have severe illness or hospitalization or even death. That's part of the issue here that they are dealing with. And I know the other part of the flip of the coin here with those NHL players is many of which are saying they concerned about their families getting the virus. It's not just themselves that they have to worry about. A lot of these guys are married with children, and they have other people in their lives to think about as well. So, it's one of those things. But the good news with this current variant of the Omicron that's been spreading like wildfire across North America and Europe and the rest of the world is that it's not really presenting so far. All the early data indicates that it's mostly asymptomatic or very mild cases. There's not an increased rate of hospitalizations, at least as of yet. It's still early, but the data looks promising that it's really not much more than a mild cold for most people, but not everybody. So clearly that's kind of the direction that the NHL might go in, but I don't know. I mean, it's really at the end of the day up to their and the NHLPA's doctors to decide what the protocols are best. But considering that they normally follow the lead of these other professional leagues, I won't be surprised if they do that. Or this taxi squad thing that's been approved now for temporary usage is likely going to have to be extended to go through the entire year, because I just don't see it happening here where it's going to magically go away anytime soon. So we'll see where this goes, but NHL action at this point is scheduled to resume here on the 28th, and we'll see if there's any further delays or anything else. But I know there were players returning today for testing. There was a lot entered into protocol, so it looks like instead of doing more extensions on returns, this seems to be the answer, but we'll see where this goes here for now. Now, as I mentioned as well, seems like there's a real good possibility we're going to see Tuukka Rask back with the Boston Bruins here in the very near future, as early as maybe a few weeks' time, maybe around mid-January or so. Head coach Bruce Cassidy recently made comments indicating that Tuukka is probably a couple of weeks away from being in a situation where he would be able to play NHL games. At this point, he still remains unsigned, but he has been practicing with the Bruins for quite some time now, off and on. So clearly they have a situation with Ullmark and Swayman. They pretty much have no choice, where Swayman is waivers exempt to put Swayman in the minors. At least they don't have to worry about losing him in that regard. And they would run with Rask and Ullmark. I mean, Ullmark started slow, but it's been better. Swayman obviously having a good season. Tuukka better hope he plays well, because if they're going to give Swayman's spot to Rask, I know the fans are going to expect a lot from him, and if he doesn't play up to his standards, well, that's going to create a bit of a goaltender controversy. But we also don't know as well is what the signing amount, like what he's going to sign for, like what's it going to take to get Tuukka Rask under contract. He's made it clear all along and said it's not about money, it's about continuing to play for the love of the game and chasing another Stanley Cup. Like clearly a cup for Rask is what he's most interested in, more than a huge payday. But considering, what he was just making as of the end of his last contract last year, I can't see him signing for as little as like $1 million. I mean, you never know. Maybe he takes a 1 year, $1 million. I'm not really sure, but so considering he's probably, with his experience and where he's been at and what he was just recently making last year, would he take 2, 3, 4 million. I really don't know what they're going to offer him and what it's going to be. But the problem is the Bruins don't have a whole lot of salary cap space. And of course, the Bruins are one of the teams we're going to talk about here when it comes to some trade talk, because clearly, they may have to make some moves, and they have players that clearly have made it known that they want out. And this Rask signing, as I've said before, once they get closer to making that a reality, is likely going to accelerate that deal or deals from happening and taking place. I mean, obviously the Zach Senyshyn trade request isn't going to have a major impact here because he's currently down in the minors. He's not really impacting their NHL salary cap situation. Like I said, that's probably going to be a situation where maybe he's packaged with another player as part of a bigger deal, or maybe he's swapped for another prospect similar age that could use a fresh start as well, something to that effect. But the Jake DeBrusk trade request to me is a more likely scenario here that maybe finally gets done. I would think that the fact that they have about $1.5 million cap space right now, but they also have guys like Bergeron and Marchand out on COVID protocol too. Like, there's a complicated cap situation, but they could create some extra space by bringing back in a DeBrusk trade maybe a player making less money. I'm not sure if that they would necessarily trade him for more of a future-based assets like a prospect or picks or something like that. I would think they're going to want, based on what we heard more recently, that they want a comparable player who can play the wing and has some NHL experience, like a younger NHL player in a similar situation. So, they would also consider a defenseman, I believe, as well. They made that known, but they want a young player, probably somebody who's close to being a first-round caliber, has got a decent amount of experience that they can swap for DeBrusk when that finally is facilitated. But if they can bring somebody back making less money and free up some extra room to get this Rask deal done, bring him in as well, then that very well could be a way to make it all happen. Hard to say, but the Bruins are going to be a busy team here, I think, in the next couple of weeks. They're not in a great spot in the standings, but they're still projecting at this point to be a playoff team. They could still, have a better second half and work their way up the standings a little bit, but with, teams like the Leafs and the Lightning and the Panthers ahead of them in the Atlantic, it's going to be tough. They're probably going to be in a situation where they're battling for a wild card unless they have an exceptional second half. That is not going to be an easy task at all. So like I said, I think there will see some deals here in January, not too far away from making all this kind of stuff happen. Get DeBrusk his trade that he's looking for, get Rask back on the roster, and start making a run for it here to see how well they can do in the second half of the season and get themselves back in better playoff contention. Now, before we look at the rest of the trade rumors, I do need to pause for a moment and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. And guess what? Hockey fans are buzzing because hockey is back. Want to know what else is buzzing? The Lawnmower 4.0 from our friends at Manscaped, who are the global leaders in male grooming, trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. I highly recommend the Performance Package 4.0, which includes their new state-of-the-art Lawnmower 4.0, as well as some other great features. The lawnmower itself has a 7,000 RPM motor, a new multifunction switch that can engage as a travel lock, gives you the ability to turn on an LED spotlight as well for a more precise shave. Also, as I mentioned on numerous occasions before, Manscaped is about much more than just a trimmer. They have everything, all aspects covered in male grooming, including some great formulations like their brand new ultra premium body wash to keep you smelling great all day long. It's certainly a big hit here. I absolutely love it. They also have other exfoliators and gels to keep all aspects of your grooming needs covered. I highly recommend you check out manscaped.com. Use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com using promo code TSH. Thanks very much for watching that promotional content. I do greatly appreciate it. Outside of the Bruins and a couple of trades that we likely will see here in the near future, a couple other teams that we are going to be keeping a real close eye on in the second half will be the Flyers and the Sharks. Now, when it comes to San Jose, the main player we're taking a look at there is Tomas Hertl, but we also have to look at Kevin Labanc. Labanc really has not had a great season, has found himself being a healthy scratch. In the case of Hertl, he's a pending UFA and is probably one of the bigger names out there on the market with a decent amount of experience, can play center, score some goals. That would be very attractive as a rental on a team looking to add center depth in that middle six, especially, going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, it was, a situation coming into the year where he made it known he wasn't sure if the Sharks wanted to re-sign him, if he wanted to stay. There's a whole Evander Kane situation kind of hanging over the team and how everything went last year in the locker room, and it certainly wasn't a great environment overall for the San Jose Sharks, and things are certainly, I think, fair to say, a bit better this year. They're performing a little bit better than expected, but even after a hot start, a situation where they're not really, probably expected to be a playoff team at this point. They're hovering around the 500 mark. So it's hard to say. So to me, I think the odds of Hertl staying with the Sharks are not great. I think the Sharks need to continue trying to find ways to get younger. They have a few good young pieces there that they've brought in recently, and they need to continue working on that, and he could be a great piece to bring him a good return. In the case of Labanc, like I said, a few years back where he signed like that 1 year, $1 million contract when he should have really cashed in, he did the team a big favor, but he has not been able to follow up the expectations on how he needs to play to get that longer term deal, in justified sense then. So, Labanc is kind of fallen out of favor there. And another player that's still young enough with a fresh start somewhere else that very well could bounce back and find his game again. So a couple players there to certainly keep your eye on, especially if the Sharks kind of fall more out of contention as we get a little bit deeper into the year. I don't think we'll see either of those trades necessarily as quick as like a DeBrusque deal. I think we're looking at, February heading towards March maybe, once the deadline is getting a little bit closer. Now when it comes to the Flyers, the same goes for them. I don't think we're going to see any big trades out of Philly real soon, but right now, of course, we already saw a coaching change with AV being given his walking papers, but Captain Claude Giroux could be on deck for that. I mean, it's a situation with the Flyers where he's been there a long time. He's been their captain a long time, and Giroux has been a heck of a player, put up a lot of great numbers for them, and even this year is on pace for another phenomenal season, offensively speaking, but it's just not seemed to be enough, and the team is not getting over the hump. They defensively certainly didn't really improve, even though they made a lot of moves in the offseason. Ryan Ellis was one of those big acquisitions who's barely played. Ivan Provorov looks lost and doesn't look like himself at all. Rasmus Ristolainen hasn't exactly been that upgrade on that physicality on the blue line that you were hoping for. Carter Hart's been better, but overall the Flyers have been a bit of a dumpster fire, and they're not trending in the right direction. So they made the coaching change. They moved up, obviously, assistant coach Mike Yeo to head coach. Of course, he's got a history with GM Chuck Fletcher. Not a huge shocking move there. It's possible that he stays in that role as an interim head coach for the rest of the year. And to me, if we don't see some, major improvements here in January, then it's pretty much already at a point where it's pretty close to being a lost season. So to me, it's going to be a given that they're likely going to be sellers at the deadline. And many Philadelphia media, I know, have been writing about the fact that they feel that, assuming that there's no miracle here and the Flyers get back in the playoff picture, that it's time for Giroux to move on and they need to go in a new direction here with their leadership group. They already moved Voracek last year. Now it's Giroux's time as a free agent to find wherever he wants to play out the remainder of his career next offseason. And for right now, they could trade him before the deadline and get some good returns. I think any team out there is looking for a nice addition for a top six guy. Giroux would be a great fit. I mean, money-wise and cap-wise is going to be a challenge, but the Flyers could retain half of that income as well to entice teams and maybe get a little better return for that as well. But you're looking at teams like the Avalanche, the Rangers, maybe not the Rangers so much because they're divisional rivals, but still the teams like that are looking for that type of addition. He would be perfect for it. And then next offseason, he can decide where he fits. There's a lot of rumors that he would love to go back and play in Ottawa, where he's spent most of his time growing up and where he calls home in the offseason. And obviously, where they're at in a rebuild, that might not be a terrible move to sign him. If the price is right, I wouldn't do a longer-term deal or anything like given his age. If they can sign him for a couple of years at a reasonable price, maybe it works out, but it's hard to say if that works or what he really wants. But I think at the end of the day, Claude Giroux is going to be more interested in a Stanley Cup more than anything else. So from that perspective, going to Ottawa right now at least doesn't really make sense because they're a ways away from really being in a spot where they can contend. That should happen in a few years down the road, but they're still quite a distance away from being in that situation. So I don't know what happens with Giroux, but the odds of him moving on are really good. He has some control here, but I would think probably in the next month or so they're going to start having conversations about where he might be interested in, where he'd be willing to waive his no trade protection to facilitate a trade to, and see where he could end up by the deadline, because I think he could be one of the biggest names moved this year. So that is all your news and rumors here for today. Certainly appreciate you taking the time to watch this video here on Boxing Day. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.